All right, so let's get it started. So, good evening, MOCA friends, comic fans. My name is Yifan Wu. I'm the Director of Programs and Chief of Staff at the Museum of Chinese America. So it is my pleasure to welcome you to MOCACon, and especially also our panel discussion. But as you have already sort of experienced our Artist Alley, but then now we have our panel discussion with Amy Chu, Pornsak, Cliff Chiang, Pornsak, and Greg Park. Yes, so they're all award-winning comics writers. And then also, this event is also being live streamed on our Facebook page, as well as being recorded for our YouTube channel. But I just want to, but before then, also I want to kind of also say special thanks to New York City Department of Education's Civics for all comics groups for donating several Asian American comics to this event. They are free, so then if you haven't picked up a copy, please do after the talk. But also, if you do enjoy tonight's program, please consider supporting the museum. And so then we can bring more programs like this to you. As you know, lots of our programs are low fee or free, right, compared to the New York City Comic Con, right, and the other comic events. But then we care about accessibility. That's why we do want you to, enjoy tonight. But then please do consider supporting MOCA, but of course also supporting the artist. That's also the purpose that we kind of specifically worked with Amy to really sort of give space and select sort of a lot of emerging artists, that might not have the opportunities, sort of at those bigger events, but then give them a space and opportunities for them to, showcase their work and then meet with every one of you. And then after the discussion, of course, you will still have time to explore the museum, but also the Artist Alley. We will have kind of a casual networking sort of event. There will be some refreshments, that you can also just mingle and then kind of talk to the artist. But most importantly, take a look at our newly acclaimed for exhibition magazine fever, X Asian American Periodicals. As we do feature a lot of the sort of the magazines from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And well, I think Amy will talk a little bit more, but then a fun fact, actually our co-host Amy was one of the co-founders of A Magazine. So, before she, has now as a comic writer. So she can share more, but then, thank you so much. She really contributing to the sort of the defining what Asian American is, or the Asian American identity. And then, so now, without further ado, I will actually hand it over to our museum president, Mike Lee, to say a few words. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Yvonne. Again, my name is Michael Lee. I'm the president of the Museum of Chinese American. I just want to welcome you all here tonight. This event is probably 15 years in the making because 15 years ago, this facility just opened, and the first ever public event that was held at this facility was an Asian American Comic Book Convention, where I came as in my 20s, and I came and I purchased the shirt. It says 2009 on it, so it's legit. It's also very tight. But it was an incredible event that I got to come as a fan. It's surreal that I'm thinking I'm running this place now, but it's surreal that I came as a fan. I got to listen to Greg, and he talked on a panel similar to this. I got to listen to the great Larry Hama, who talked about how he only read women's magazines because he wanted to pick up women and not think about comic books all the time. And he also said he wanted to turn Snake Eyes into like a crazy person. I always remember that talk. And yeah, it was just a really amazing thing because back then, I guess 15 years ago, there were a lot of successful Asian Americans in comics, but we didn't think of them as really leading the industry. And now we really think about them as leading the industry. So I took over this job in April. Before April, in March, I got to go to this event where Amy was launching her Fighting to Belong comic. And right there, plug. And I know Amy from the comic book industry. I follow her on Facebook. I know all the books that she writes. And so I just beeline straight to her. It's like, hey, I'm taking over the museum. And she's like, let's talk. And we had lunch, and we said, yeah, let's bring this back, right? This was my first event here, and in my, I guess, first unofficial act as president, but becoming the president, I said, I want to bring this back. And so we came up with this idea that Comic-Con, New York City Comic-Con is tomorrow, all the way through Sunday. There's lots of Asian American writers and artists in town, and so we wanted to give them a home before they have to go fight with all the comic book fans for the next 4 days. So we hope we can turn this into an annual event. So if you have fun tonight, please tell others about it. Please bring other people here next year because, yeah, it'd be wonderful to keep this as a great tradition and not be something that just existed 15 years ago. We hope it can be every year and welcome all you guys back every year so we can build a little family here. Without further ado, all this would not be possible without Amy Chu and saying, like, yeah, let's do this. And so she, opened up all her Rolodex, reached out to everybody she knew, and brought us all together here today. And we also get to honor her tribute to the Asian American community through founding A Magazine. So with that, I hand it over to Amy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. This would not be possible really without Michael and Yifan, actually, because they did all the heavy lifting. When they say I pulled out my Rolodex, Rolodexes aren't even a thing anymore. I really kind of, try to...
Autocomplete on the
I can't find anybody on this, but yeah, anyway. But they really did the heavy lifting. Look how wonderful it is, what a warm feeling that I'm getting. And also reminding me, I had forgotten that actually I was there also in 2009 before I was even in comics. I can't remember why. I think it was because I was, I used to be active in the Asian American nonprofit community. I actually was the executive director of the Asian American Arts Alliance for a while. And with that hat, I came not thinking I would ever be in the industry up with these legendary folks here. So I feel extremely honored that this is even happening. In fact, it's a little bit surreal because the only reason I'm up here is actually because of A Magazine. Because one of my business school classmates are like, hey, didn't you do something in publishing? Let's start a comics imprint. And I'm like, sure, why not? Right? And this is the point. And of course, little did I know, it's obviously really hard, but that you have to do things like that are kind of fearless and not think too hard about it. Because if it doesn't work out, what's the worst that can happen, right? So, and we can also get in later because I frequently get the, as maybe some of you did too, the question of, well, what do your parents think about that? So that's going to be another question later on, right? But I'm so appreciative that the museum is doing this, and we hope this is one of many. You mentioned Larry Hama. We would love to get Larry here. Janice Chiang, legendary folks who have been in this business way longer than me, and also all of you, right? So thank you, and a big applause for you guys. So I want this to be kind of a casual conversation because we very rarely get to be like this, right? And especially in a wonderful, but also, right? This is very specifically as Asian American creators. I do want to talk a little bit about your journey, right? And because also both of you work at Vertigo at the same time. No, just Right, so can you just talk a little bit, because I'm curious myself. It's not that I didn't grow up reading comics. I think everyone did in some way, shape, or form, right? But when people ask me that, I'm like, I did not get into this because I remember when I was 8, I picked up this issue of whatever it was, right? I asked my mom about this, by the way. And I said, why did we not have comics? And she said, well, because we were too poor. We didn't have any comics, right? So I came at comics much later, a bit in college, right? Can you talk a little bit about your journey and also your family? Like, was the family supportive, or what kind of role or non-role did they play in your professional journey, your interests? I'm going to start with Cliff since he's nodding.
I guess I come through comics through family. My older brother started reading comics and brought them home. And I was aware of comics, but hadn't read any of them. And so when he started bringing back things like Fantastic Four and X-Men, and I was 10, so it's like the perfect age to read that stuff. It really, I just became hooked immediately. I was always drawing ever since I was really young, so this became a new thing to try and emulate. The funny thing is, I never considered who was making that work, and it took me a long time to think about even considering comics as a career. It just didn't. I think, not even though I had favorite writers and artists, I just never considered it, an actual job. It could be that my parents were, somehow dissuading me from it, subconsciously. So it wasn't until I was in college that I really started to have to think hard about what I wanted to do for a career, and I was just intensely interested in storytelling and thought maybe I might go into film, but realized that comics was a medium that I really felt drawn to and wanted to work in.
And you realized this how far in? Because you were an English lit major?
Yeah, I was an English lit major. About a year into it, I was like, I don't know if I can just do this. And I think it was maybe over the summer or something that I realized that I needed to double concentrate in English lit and art. Well, possibly for my own sanity, just to like make it through. I think if I was just doing lit and criticism, for 4 years, it would have driven me nuts. And I was finding, I had, been drawing in high school, but just more as a hobby, and, taking some art classes at school really kind of awakened that and the stuff that I was reading in college was, just so different. I started reading Vertigo stuff. I started reading Sandman, and realizing that there was this whole world of comics for mature audiences really just expanded.
That was the
everything.
right time, right? What
Yeah.
year was that? That was in the 90s?
Yeah,
90s.
92.
Yeah. So were you shopping at Million Year Picnic?
Million Year
or-
Picnic, New England Comics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. And this was when you were at Harvard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so during that time, I'm just saying this personally too, right? Because when I was at MIT, right, there was a healthy community of folks, at least at MIT, who read comics, and it wasn't a big deal, but it was the mature comics, and Newbury Comics was also owned by an MIT grad. Yeah, so there was. This is the 80s. I'm a little bit older. The Student Center had a Newbury Comics, but that wasn't the case at Harvard. So you had to go.
Well, just right into town, right in the middle of Cambridge, there was a bunch of stores, and I got to see. I mean, my local store when I was growing up was like in a mall, and I couldn't get there by myself. So, this was a whole new thing where suddenly you're just going into the middle of Cambridge, you've got some pocket money, and you could follow. For me, for the first time, I could follow titles, month to month, and find older titles and things that I could fall into, like Love and Rockets. Stuff like that.
So when you graduate, when you're in senior year, people are recruiting, and you were not going to the investment banking interviews.
You'd be surprised, actually. I was not sure what I was going to do.
Yeah.
My plan was maybe to try and get into comics, but also have a law degree maybe on the side or something like that. So I ended up taking like the LSAT and applying to law school and going on these consulting interviews and very confused. I think partly because I couldn't myself commit to the idea of being an artist. It just seemed too risky. I knew my parents were not, they would be grudgingly okay with it because they probably knew that they couldn't really talk me out of anything. But I think personally, it was, the idea of committing to it and doing it 100% that I just wasn't there yet. And it took a long time.
And when you say it took a long time, right? Because, we didn't really properly introduce Cliff, right? If you aren't familiar, right? I think you are the only Asian American artist, creator with a postage stamp, a U.S. postage stamp. Am I right?
Yeah, I think so. Or at least a Wonder Woman postage stamp. Yeah. So, and after, when I was in college, I wanted to get into comics and ended up, through having, the benefit of having an Ivy degree, it doesn't help so much in comics necessarily, but I did manage to get like an internship at Marvel, probably because of that, and then that kind of, it helps out, then trying to find work afterwards. I didn't have anything really lined up after graduating, and managed to kind of take I'd gotten into law school and managed to take a couple of years before entering, and I used that time to try and find work in comics and landed at DC with Vertigo.
So you never went to law school?
Nope.
Any regrets?
Not really. Not really. I mean, I have friends who are lawyers, and they're very nice people. But yeah, just for myself, I don't think just where
You
my
did it
head is
quite well.
at. What that?
Pornsak, did you have the same trajectory? Or
I think the parts of it that are similar, parts of it that are different. It's funny, I can't remember. I didn't have anyone in my life that brought comics into my life. I guess I was that person. I was trying to, as you were saying, I was trying to think like, I don't think I've ever known like what was it about comics, why it stuck or anything like that. I didn't know I read a lot, and maybe there was more of a community. Like there were other kids that were reading comics, where maybe I didn't know any other kids reading the books that I was reading. So maybe that was why, sort of like.
well, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Jersey. I was born in New York. I grew up in Jersey. Then from Jersey we moved to Boston, and I was kind of like sort of picking up comics around that time. But even then, I had more comics than a kid my age. Kids at that age, it was like 10, 12. You don't have that many comics, so I had a little bit more than your average. So I don't know when I sort of what maybe get that bug, or what was it about comics sort of specifically. Maybe it was a community that was reading those comics. I don't know. And then when I was 12, my parents decided to move the family to Thailand for a year, and then 1 year in Thailand became 2 years in Thailand, became 3 years in Thailand, and me and my sisters were like, oh, we live in Thailand. They just didn't want to fight, so that's how they decided to move us. And comics and television, there was this map in my head that was just like, that for some reason, it was like, if I could understand how stories worked in these mediums, I could understand the person I would be if I never left America. And that's kind of when I really got interested in comics. And it's comics specifically because they were cheap and I could read them over and over again, as opposed to like a movie which I can only, watch once. And there weren't that many, we didn't have that access to many videotapes back in my house. So it was a thing I could read over and over again. I would get to know the credits in comics and all that kind of stuff. So I got to know the people behind them in that level. But that's, I think, that time in Thailand was really what got me interested in the storytelling of comics and really trying to figure out how it works. But even then, though, I got to America, I went to school, I realized I wanted to be a writer. But even then, I didn't really think of comics as sort of an option. I was doing more in film. And I remember that a friend of mine had heard that there was an assistant editor position opening at Vertigo for Karen Berger, and he came to me, he's like, I have no idea what those words mean, but I feel like you would. It feels like you would appreciate that. And I was like, I know I would. And I ended up interviewing and ended up working for Karen for about 7 years before moving out to LA to be part of DC's TV stuff for about 4 years, and that kind of started me off in this whole comics journey.
Speaking of which, Karen says hi to you all. I know this because I just turned in a script 2 days late. But yeah, it's that's how she did her first slip.
2 days isn't even really late, isn't it?
Spoken like a true freelancer.
So I'm going to shift to Greg, right? It's the same. No, you started. Yeah.
I started in comics in the sense that I was drawing. My mom was the kind of mom who she hated coloring books. She bought us paper and crayons and pens and markers. So I was drawing basically from as early as I can remember. I've got I dug up some old stuff that I had drawn where I was drawing pictures and my mom was writing the captions for me. So I was making either you could call them comics, you could call them picture books from the time I was about 5. And so I was drawing my whole life. In high school I grew up in Dallas. I went to the local high school where kind of everybody did everything, and so I was I learned how to. My mom also taught me how to do black and white photography, and so I was doing photography. I was doing theater. I was doing editing the school. One of the editors of the school paper, and just all kinds of stuff the way you do in a small school, and I was writing. I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. Ray Bradbury was my hero, but I was always drawing too. The Peanuts was my first introduction really to comics. My mom had these Fawcett collections, these little Fawcett paperback collections of Peanuts comics. My sisters and I would read those again and again and again, and eventually we got the bigger books. But I was also reading, we had I was riding my bike down to the 7-Eleven to buy comics on the rack, but I could never get sequential ones. Like, I remember it took me like literally months to find Micronauts number 2. I had Micronauts number 1 and 3, but I didn't have 2 for like, a huge amount of time. And that's the way it went. There was I had a lot of random Marvel comics that they used to sell in these, like at the Kmart, in 3-packs. That were, I see all this, it's like, okay, so there's a lot of Gen X 50-somethings in the crowd here. And it would be like these 30 or 35-cent comics, but they were like in a 3-pack, and there would just be random issues. And so I would have like Defenders number whatever it was, and then I would never know what happened next. You know what I mean? It would be a cliffhanger, and I would never know. But I love it. You know what I mean? So I really just dug all those comics. I had and so I was, and also I remember I read comic strips like Calvin and Hobbes started when I was a kid, and I remember I was flipping them every day. Like I from when the first Calvin and Hobbes came out, I clipped the first Calvin and Hobbes. And I just kept it. I really wish I had that. I did at some point. I chucked it, but I had like the first year of Calvin and Hobbes clipped. And I just love drawing. I love art. I mean, I love comics, and I love storytelling in general. But it was really resonating with me, Cliff, when you were saying that, like, you never thought of doing it for a living. Same. I mean, I was drawing cartoons for my high school paper. I went to college and I was drawing comics for the school papers and stuff. But I never thought about doing it professionally. Like, it literally never occurred to me. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but then also when I was writing short stories and all this kind of stuff. When I got to college, I had always been interested in politics, and I became a political science major, and that's what I ended up, after I graduated from college, I went back home to Texas and worked for Ann Richards when she was running for governor in 1990, and that's what I was going to do. And then I got a reprieve, because I got a scholarship to go to Oxford to study history, and I got involved with the student film group there, and then I went to NYU to do film. And I made a movie called Robot Stories, independent Asian American sci-fi movie, came out in 2001, 2002, and then I would move sideways into comics from there. So this thing that I started off loving, I just came back to it, almost through, just random things, but it all made sense when I came back to it. I mean, your original question had to do with like parents and support and all that kind of stuff. I'm biracial. My dad is Korean, my mom is white. My dad's a doctor, but he was like, I think if he hadn't, been an immigrant kid who was under an enormous amount of pressure to survive and whatnot, if he had had the kind of luxuries that he provided for me, or the kind of privilege he provided for me, he might have become an artist, because he drew. He would draw with us when we were kids. And then my mom, my white mom, was an English teacher when she was, back in the day. So her love of books and just like nurturing young minds was always there. She was, and also I never saw her draw, but she just encouraged that with us. I learned photography from her, which was also a visual thing. So that whole sense of framing things, and so both my parents were had a real understanding of the arts and appreciation for it. And I think when I'd done this other stuff, I'd gone to, I'd gotten this great scholarship to go to Oxford, and I'd gotten this job working in politics like that. I'd done all of these things, and then I got into NYU for film school, and I think they were like, okay, I guess he's just going to do that. So they were never like, you shouldn't do that. I also one of the things that my dad and I could always do, even when I was a cranky adolescent, is watch movies. You know what I mean? Like, we saw all the Kurosawa movies together and everything. And he loves movies, you know what I mean? So the idea of that I was going to become a filmmaker made sense to them. And it worked out, not that it was easy, but it worked out. And then moving sideways into comics, then, after Robot Stories came out, I got a meeting with Marvel, and it was just one of those lucky times when they were looking for somebody new, and I happened to walk in the door with something interesting, I guess, and I ended up, it took a while, developing different things that didn't happen for various reasons, but eventually I, it kicked in, and I here I am 20 years later, literally almost 20 years later. My first comic book with Marvel came out in November 2004. So thank you. Yes, that's Warlock.
Did you expect 20 years later you'd still be doing this?
Yeah, I know. It's and even when that came out, I was like, well, that's cool. I hope I can. And then it got canceled with issue 4 because anyway, I could tell the story. But then I got another gig, and it was I did this Phoenix book. I got tapped for this Phoenix. It was called Phoenix End Song. It was an X-Men book, and the Phoenix story was literally the biggest story in mainstream comics in the 80s. So the idea that I was going to do kind of a sequel to that blew my mind. It's one of the, every once in a while you get a gig and you literally jump up and down in your room after you get it, and that was the first time I did that in comics. It just, I couldn't even believe it. And that just happened to take off. And then I was like, I think I might be able to do this, and it worked out.
Well, so part of doing this too is bringing people together. All 4 of us, we're making a living and award-winning, doing all the great stuff. It's my sister-in-law, I gave her tickets to see Hadestown, and she came back and said, hey, there were Asian actors on stage? And I was like, yeah, there are Asians on Broadway, right? So part of this this is a common thing, I think, also within our own communities, is that we tend to buy into certain stereotypes. And I think part of what we want to discuss here, too, is that absolutely there are some that are very real, but at the same time there's a huge diversity of what we do, and that our parents aren't always non-supportive, right? I mean, I don't want to say my parents are supportive or not supportive, but when I started...
Are they in the room, Amy?
I can do whatever I want. When my first Comic-Con, I was going to Toronto Fan Expo, and my grandmother at the time was living there, and I'm like, oh, it's Mother's Day, I'm going to have to see her, but then I'm also going to have to explain why I'm in town. And I didn't want it to get out because I felt that there was a lot of pressure that that's not a legitimate thing, right? So I went to see her. I did not have a good answer. She didn't actually ask. She literally just went and said, oh, so I hear you're in town for comics. And I was like, who ratted me out, right? My dad apparently told her all along what they had not told me, that my grandfather was a huge DC Comics fan and had amassed a huge collection. And she started asking me questions like, what is it like to work with these artists? And they're like, really? I was like, somebody could have alerted me to that so I didn't have so much anxiety, right? So I think everyone has a different experience, right? That is not the classic, what we see a lot in sitcoms, oh, you must be a doctor or an engineer. Did you feel that pressure?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely was that. And as a parent now, I don't begrudge the practicality of immigrant parents, the idea of like moving to another country and having to raise a family and, where, it's not your native language and all those things. I understand where they're coming from. But at the same time, I could also see them, and, like Greg mentioned, there was art in their background. My mom, she is a trained musician and opera singer, but, she worked in corporate accounting for 40 years, So there's a way in which their deferred grades also, I think, must have played a part in, kind of allowing me to do, follow, whatever my thing was.
It's funny. I love to be able to bust the stereotype and said my parents were totally cool, but they still don't know what I do. So if we can just keep this between us, I really appreciate it. They don't know how to work the internet anyway, so it's gonna work out great for me. But I will say that I am super grateful that as much as they didn't get any aspect of what I did, they still made room for me to do it. They still, like they definitely didn't approve of comics, but I still had a lot of them around the house, and so they were still really good about that. I had this. There's a nice piece of irony now where my cousin, actually of all things, is like a comic book scholar, and so my mother will learn about what I do through him, because he'll call and be like, he's doing this really great thing. And then my mom will be like, why is your cousin telling me about these things that you're doing? And then I'll start to explain it to her, and then she'll start asking me like, why am I not married yet? And da-da-da-da. And then it goes, but for that brief second, when she's talking to my cousin, she gets a little bit of a sense of what I do. But I'd love to be able to dispel those stereotypes. But I think to Cliff's point, when you're an immigrant parent and, the idea of like coming sort of all this way so your kids can, write and draw cartoons is a big thing it's a big hurdle to just get your head over. And I give them all the credit in the world that as much as they didn't understand it, they still make room for it.
Brad,
Yeah, I mean, my parents were great. They were pretty great about the whole thing. I mean, I think, it is interesting though, because I did grow up as an Asian American kid. I mean, I look pretty racially ambiguous now as an adult. I mean, if I didn't have my mask on, you'd see my beard, and whatever group I'm in, people think I'm part of that group. I go to a Jewish wedding, everybody thinks I'm Jewish. But when I was a kid, everybody knew I was Asian, and I grew up definitely with this feeling that I was vulnerable, even though the kids I grew up with were great. You're not safe. You know what I mean? And this was in the 80s in Texas. And frankly, we're not safer now. I mean, we're less safe now, given everything that's happening in this country. Please vote, by the way. You know what I mean? Please, for God's sakes, get everybody to vote. There are two things related to this, which I think are relevant for me personally. One is that storytelling was a way of surviving. Because if I could tell a story, if I could tell my story, and that's even just as superficial as like relating to people and making people laugh, and then I was going to be less likely to become a victim, So that's one thing I think, and that certainly, and also if I could explain my story, then I don't know, but stories could make people not kill you. You know what I'm saying? That sounds really dramatic. But that's kind of the underlying thing here. I remember reading Native Son in high school and thinking about that so much. Like, it's all about like this inability to communicate with other people. I haven't read it in years, but that was what I took away from it. Anyway, so I think that drove me to become a storyteller. But also this notion of achievement. You know what I mean? I mean, this is such a stereotype in Asian American communities, but this whole thing of like racking up achievements, like Asian families, stereotypically get so thrilled when their kids go to the Ivy League, and like, exactly, we got like, nobody in comics goes to the Ivy League, and yet on this panel, there are 3 people who went to the Ivy League.
Bad ROI, basically.
It's ridiculous. We're stereotypes, you know what I mean? But that kind of pressure to achieve is also part of surviving in the world. You know what I mean? Like if I can achieve, then I will be safer, right? And so I think the fact that I had paired this creative journey with this, with hitting these other benchmarks. That made it all make sense, you know what I mean, and feel safe to my parents in a way, so maybe that helped make it help make it feel acceptable then, or something that they could be excited about and see being a real thing.
Well, let's talk about representation, right? Because you created Pichetshote when?
That was one of the first cool thing. I mean, everything I got to do with Marvel was cool, but in my second year working at Marvel, they had a thing where they had a bunch of old names from Timely Comics, which was Marvel's predecessor, and they were like, hey, let's take these names and get these sort of new writers to us to create new characters based on them. And I got picked for that, and I picked Mastermind Excello was one of the names, who was like a super genius spy. And I was like, well, they wanted us to reimagine characters using that name. And I was like, well, I had been thinking about the fact that there were no young Asian American male characters in comics. There are a lot of there are a handful of Asian American women characters. They're Jubilee, basically, is the one Asian American woman character. And just about all the other characters who were Asian were like Japan Man. You know what I mean? Like they're like characters from another country who were like, the uncharitable way to say it is like they're like the, stereotypical representation of something from that country. You know what I'm saying? What's that?
Like Sunfire.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like Sunfire, who's like, got basically a rising sun kind of thing going on. I mean, like they become just like, oh, that's the Japanese character, who represents Japan or whatever. And those characters can be a lot of fun, but I was like, yeah, let's do a Asian American kid who talks too much. You know what I mean? Who anything that's in his head, he's saying. Like he's the opposite of inscrutable. Like he was entirely scrutable. Like that, and that was my way of kind of like pushing back on the stereotypes of the darkness for years, right? But I was also like, I kind of embraced the stereotypes and pushed back on them at the same time. Because Mastermind Excello, okay, let's make him a super genius, which is the stereotype, but then let's give him no emotional, no ability to control his mouth. Like he talks all the time, and he basically has anger management issues. Like he can't, he's not he's all of his emotions are just out there all the time. In the first story, he like has a close encounter with the Hulk, and it's like he and the Hulk bond because they're both like they have trouble handling their emotions in important situations. So that's how Amadeus came about. I gave him the name Amadeus Cho. I have friends who like name their kids Stanford and stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. And so it was kind of that was also a very Asian American thing to me. Like like Asian kids named Yale. You know what I mean? Like that's a real thing. Later on we introduced, like, his sister was named, she's Maddie Cho, because her parents named her Madame Curie Cho. So that was and this was the glory of working in comics at the time, because I'd come up through film, independent film, made this Asian American independent feature that was really well regarded, could not get funding to do my Chinese gunslinger movie, which is still my dream movie, for a long time, and I got into comics, and it was like, okay, I have this chance to do this thing, and I was like, I just pitched it, and they did not come back and say, could this guy be white? They just said, cool, because in comics you just need to get a couple people to say yes. My editor said yes, and so we did it. And now there are rumors that Amadeus has just been announced that he's going to be in this new Iron Man TV show they're doing, this kids show, and there are other rumors that I don't know the veracity of and couldn't tell you if I did, but eventually he will probably end up, hopefully, in the in movies and stuff. He's been in video games and all kinds of other stuff, but it's a wild and weird journey. But that was always important to me. To put characters up on the screen, on that screen in film and then on the page in comics.
Well, so Pornsak, you did that with the Good Asian, but was it a similar thinking or different? What were you doing?
Some similar, some not. I think for the Good Asian specifically, what I wanted was I'd seen a lot of Asian sort of stuff in pop culture, but I hadn't seen anything specifically Asian American, and something similar to what sort of Greg was saying. So I knew I wanted a story that was specifically Asian American. I think in comics, if they want, there's a lot of stuff, and you'll see it, where, it's Asian American, and then it's all a story about, like, Chinese gods or something like that. And I wanted something that was specifically Asian American, because that wasn't something I had seen. There might have been, I knew that there was an audience for it, because I had worked in a million-year picnic in Cambridge, and I would see there were a lot of Asian American patrons coming into the store. So I knew that there was an audience for that sort of stuff. And even when I was an editor at Vertigo, I was trying to get some of that stuff together to graphic novels, but I didn't really have my chops yet as an editor. And so when it came time, when I thought about what I wanted to write, this was sort of the thing I wanted to write. And yeah, I think it was just more that than anything else. I wanted that to exist. I wanted that particular. It's interesting. I think pop culture, there's a certain trickiness they sort of have with dashes and slashes. So, so they understand Asian and they understand American. They don't understand Asian American. They understand Chinese. They understand Caucasian. They don't understand Hapa. So like any of that, and so as a result, things kind of get erased along the way. And so part of what I wanted to do, and I think what I've been trying to do with sort of a lot of this stuff is, and there's a commercial reason for that, and I think there is a creative ambition or reason for that, is take a look at the stuff that is kind of erased and sort of getting lost and seeing what, I can do in my work to sort of shine a spotlight on that just a little bit, just because it makes the genre and the material more interesting more than anything else. It also makes it more realistic and more relevant. I'm not a fan of words like representation and diversity and all that kind of stuff. To me, it's more about realism and relevance, and that's why you integrate stuff into the stuff we love, because otherwise they just get stale and irrelevant more than anything else.
Do you feel that it sounds like neither of you got any kind of pushback? There was not kind of...
Not with that specific project, no. And I've had lots of great experiences too, where, like I wrote a series called MOCA, which became that co-created with Tak Miyazawa, the artist, and that became the Netflix TV show MOCA that you may have seen. Go check it out. And that again, like, stars a Chinese American kid and has, it's got a lot of different people in the cast, but from the beginning they were just like, cool, other times it can be a little, I know that people, it's not always easy for everybody in comics, and sometimes it's like, I think at different times there's pushback that you might not even hear about, where, like a project won't happen that you want to have happen, and they won't tell you why, but it's because that character is not thought to be a character that will make money, and the reason is because, one of the reasons, historically, is because that character is not white. You know what I mean? So that stuff, I'm sure, happens. I haven't had it happen to me directly in that kind of a way, as compared to film, where that shit happens all the time. Every day, right now, even as we speak, it's happening to one of us, I'm sure. But pardon my language. I realize
it's tricky, right? Because we have choices. I mean, these are all that's a creator-owned project, The Good Asian, right? Which is wonderful, and congratulations on its success. But it's also the question, right? As Asian American creators, sometimes there's a pressure. I certainly do get asked to work on things like Turning Red because, I'm Asian, or it is a problematic character from the 60s. Can I do something with that character, right? So Cliff, how do you feel about this issue, I guess? Do we need to represent, are these things that, it's a tricky thing, right?
Yeah, I think when we're left to our own devices, we absolutely do. The problem is when it's, corporate properties, and it's, Marvel or DC asking you to do something. It's like you don't have full, free reign to do whatever you want or bring whatever. Someone has to say yes, and so I think it's very telling that MOCA.U is creator owned as well, right?
Yeah.
And and The Good Asian, and Paper Girls, one of our main characters is Erin, and she's Asian, and weirdly, I feel like that was probably the first time I was drawing a main character who was Asian, and these things just happen because you naturally want to express yourself and see yourself and put yourself into the work. So, it does become a problem. And when you're working on, say, superheroes and you're stuck with a character who is kind of like a walking flag, then it's hard to see them as anything but that. And, so it's more difficult to put your own experience into those books.
So where do we go from here? Because I feel good having this conversation, but I also feel that there's more work to be done. My first published story was Vertigo, and it was a short story with the main character was a middle-aged black female, and it wasn't pitched that way. I was a new writer, but once we started, I changed the character because I felt it was important, and I also asked for Aletha Martinez to draw it, and I got a nice note back from Aletha, who had been working on Iron Man since the 90s. She's one of the, she's legacy, right? And she sent me a very nice note saying this is the first time she's ever been asked to draw a middle-aged black female. Ever. In all her career. So I was horrified, but I also felt good because this is our power as a creator, as a writer, or an artist who's in charge, right? What else can we do? And I guess this is a question for everybody too out there, like, because we, whether we like it or not, right, we represent and hopefully we can inspire the next generation. But what do you feel like we should be doing, or just keep going, or what is the message we want to send to people?
I think a lot of it has to do with agency, and I think we're each at different positions in our life and in our career, which employs different types of agency. Going back to something what Greg says, and it deals with your original question as well, like, Image didn't give me any pushback about publishing The Good Asian, but one of the things I've seen sort of throughout, not just The Good Asian, but the different projects that I work on, and it is very much factors into the projects that I take, and it's something that Greg sort of said, is there is a white budget for projects and there's a POC budget for projects. And so it's become very in vogue, less so maybe in this past year or so, but there was certainly a time before this where it's very in vogue, where everyone wants sort of a POC project, and one of the things you quickly find out is they have a POC budget attached to that project, because they don't think it's going to have as wide an audience as a white project, and so they put in less resources behind it, and then it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Then you have something like Ms. Marvel, right?
Yeah.
Which completely blew
yeah. Well, and it's a thing. It has a lot to do with how much faith the publisher or the studio has in the project itself. So, when I'm looking at sort of projects, a lot of times it's like I get offered a lot, especially after The Good Asian. I get offered a lot of Asian characters. I turn them down most of the time. And partly it's because I want to be mindful of other creators of color who are working, because I know that we're all kind of stuck on this whole, this POC niche, and it's more than just people of color. There are wonderful, Amy, you're one of them, wonderful female authors who are working in comics who only write female characters, and it makes no damn sense, right? They're just wonderful writers, but they'll get offered Wonder Woman, they'll get offered Supergirl, they never get offered Batman, they never even get offered Nightwing. It's part of this thing, it's part of this laziness that sort of happens. And so I do think that, and I happen to have a little bit sort of at the moment, and it'll probably go away after a minute, but when you do have a certain amount of influence, I think, what is your responsibility? You have the option to force editors and force studios to get a little bit more imaginative in how they're casting stuff, and when they're doing that for you, it opens their imaginations to do it for other people. So I think about that a lot when I take on jobs.
Yeah, I think there's also a responsibility to, I read a trans person talking about this, nothing about us without us. And they were talking about news coverage, and like coverage of trans issues. And there are all these articles that come out, like, discussing the trans question, and they don't interview any trans people, you know what I mean? It's disgusting. So, but that phrase just really stuck with me, nothing about us without us. And I think that kind of thing, so I think we have a responsibility, also, as, two things. I like it when they call me about Asian projects, you know what I mean? Because I want to do those, and I don't want them to get screwed up, you know what I mean? And I don't always want to do the ones that I'm called about. Amy was talking about what I call reclamation projects, where they've got like a racist character, basically, and can this be fixed? And sometimes it's like, yeah, let's do that, and sometimes it's like, I don't think so. I'm not going to do that one. But I think it's I like the fact that they call us I'd like us to have options of doing those things or not, and also doing other things. I did 5 years on Darth Vader, who is not Asian or Asian American. But that was right up my alley. You know, I'm a Gen X Star Wars kid, and I freaking knocked that book out of the park. I wrote the Hulk for like 4 years. I also wrote the Asian American Hulk when Amy Chu became the Hulk. But you know what I mean. So we should not be limited. But at the same time, if I'm pulled on to a project that deals with another underrepresented group, I really make an effort to make sure the team is diverse if I'm going to do it. You know, and that the team had, like I worked on I did a Lilo and Stitch book, and I'm Asian American. I've got I have some family in Hawaii. I spent a lot of time in Hawaii. I'm not native Hawaiian. You know what I mean? And those characters are very specifically native Hawaiian. And so one of my big stipulations, if I was going to write this book, I wanted to be sure that we had, and we ended up finding Moana McAdams, who is this amazing Native American writer, and she became a consulting editor and cultural consultant. It was fantastic. I'm doing a book, Sam Wilson, Captain America, right now, and I'm co-writing that with Evan Narcisse, who, I'm a Boy Scout. I was a Boy Scout, so I got the Captain America stuff covered. Sounds corny, sounds ridiculous, but it also has a whole, you know what I mean? Like there's certain aspects that are really in my wheelhouse, but I was not going to write a black lead whose very existence as this character turns on the black experience. You know what I mean? Like you put a black man as Captain America, that's I think I've got a pretty good grasp of a lot of these issues, but I am not black. I don't have that lived experience. And Evan is a brilliant writer and is bringing. I mean, it's just so. I could not do this book alone. You know what I mean? Like so if I'm these days if I'm in a place, I also feel like as a fellow person from a marginalized background, I don't want to be stepping on other people. You know what I mean? Like we're all in this together, and these projects, like comics is collaborative to begin with. Like we are not the authors of our books. You know, I hate the term author. Like I'm just a writer on these books. You know what I mean? Like, and the other folks, everybody who works on the book is a co-creator. So let's get on to all the people who need to be on these books in order to make it happen. That's not always easy to do in comics because, unlike film and TV, there's not really budgets set up in most comic companies for cultural consultants and things like that. You know what I mean? So it takes special effort to kind of make this stuff happen. But I mean, that's one of the things that I think we have to, that's one of our responsibilities, I think.
I think we are running out of time, but what I wanted to do really quickly, I do want you to talk about your upcoming projects, but also because I'm imagining that there are some people here who are either creators or aspiring creators or have someone in their extended family or orbit. What do you want to share as kind of advice or words of encouragement to those folks to be as successful as you are?
Yeah, I was also here as a guest in 2009, and one of the things that really was striking to me was just because I don't think of myself that way, but just that it is important to see people doing it, and that there might, there were younger kids, and to know that this is an option, that you can go into the arts, and that your experience is valid and crucial to the process as well, into making art. So, I'm glad to be back here, and I hope, we can do more of this, and that we just need to be out there. I think the more of us are out there telling our stories, it's just going to shift. It just moves a needle, and that helps.
I think on my end, I think the advice I would give is that the person that you are sends a signal to the people that you want to meet, because like attracts like. So I think that if you want to be in a community that nurtures each other, that helps each other without any strings attached, the easiest way to do that is to help somebody and without any strings attached. And I think the more you get into that practice, the more you will find that community, which I do think is very important if you're dealing with all this stuff.
That's awesome. I love that. Cast your bread upon the water. That's really, yeah, seriously. It's not a zero-sum game. We aren't taking jobs from each other, we're making jobs for each other. If any one of us succeeds, if any one of us succeeds, it makes it easier for all of us to get our next projects approved. And that includes everybody in this room, Spike Lee has always been one of my heroes, he proved there's an audience for black film at a time when people didn't believe it. And that's exactly the way I've thought about, we just have to do that for every other community. And then we turn out for, I have this big dream, or that we all support each other, you know what I mean? That's the only way it works. My advice to anybody who's doing creative work is to, everybody talks about imposter syndrome, oh my God, I can't do this. I recommend the opposite of it. Literally only you can tell your story. Literally only you can tell the story that's burning inside of you. No one else can tell that story because no one else is you. No one else has had your experiences. No one else has your voice. You may be struggling to find your voice. We all are. I still am. But you have it. It's there. You just got to keep working on it. And that story that you have, that voice you have, literally no one else on the planet has it. And there are people who are going to want to hear that. That's my advice to you, is to remember that when you face all that doubt and rejection and pain and agony that comes, because we all suffer from that too. But no, seriously, I believe that with all my heart. That if you have a story to tell, you are the person who needs to tell that story, and you're going to do it better than anybody else.
So really quickly, what are you working on now? What should people be looking for? What are you excited?
I've got an issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is a childhood favorite for us. That'll be coming out in a couple of weeks, and then at the end of the year, I've got an issue of Batman: The Last Halloween coming out from DC.
I have a project through Image called Horizon Experiment. It's 5 one-shot pilots for potential new series. So if the demand is there, the sales are good, we'll do more of them. But they're each done by different creators of color, and the challenge I made to all of them was give me a protagonist of color, set your story in a popular genre, and set the story up in such a way that if you change the background of your character, your story would work. So last month I came out with my one-shot, which was The Manchurian by the great artist Terry Dodson. Oh, someone's holding up a copy right there. Thank you. About a Chinese super spy working covert missions here in America for China. And I think next week we have The Sacred Dam coming out, which is by a fantastic screenwriter. The name is Saber Prasada. He's Pakistani-American Muslim, and the great Michael Walsh, who is currently doing Universal Monsters Frankenstein, which is a fantastic book. And they're doing a book called The Sacred Dam, which is about a Muslim exorcist. And I love it because the second I heard Muslim exorcist, it made me realize that I've seen hundreds of exorcism stories, and they're always from a Christian Catholic background. So it's and I think it's very much a proof of concept of just acknowledging different aspects opens up open up avenues in these stories that we think we know so well. So The Sacred Dam comes out next week. It's a great issue, and hope you check it out.
I've got a book called Lawful, which is coming out from Boom, and the basic premise is that it's in a world where, this city in a fantastical world where if you break the rules in any way, you gradually start to turn into a monster. You acquire a monster. It shows up on your face. Your guilt shows on your face and body. And it's about a kid this straight-laced, lawful good kid who's always tried to, be the... it's not autobiographical, I swear. It's all about my anxiety, is what it is. And it's about, so it's about a kid who's incredibly lawful who starts to discover that maybe this whole game is rigged. But it's awesome. Check it out. Diego Galindo's drawing that. But the most important thing I'm working on right now, or that I've been working on, is a group project with a whole bunch of other comics people. It's called Stop Project 2025 Comics. And if you... if you go to, and of course, this is purely, I'm purely speaking for myself. This is not endorsed by the museum or whatever. But if you go to stopproject2025comic.org, you will see a whole bunch of different short comic book stories that delve into all of the ways that Project 2025 would ruin our country and hurt people and hurt you and hurt me and hurt our kids and hurt everybody that you know in various different ways. And it's astounding in how many different ways it would hurt us. But it's an easily digestible comics form that you can share with undecided voters in your life. I don't know, maybe
on Instagram, right? You can also people are reposting on Instagram.
There are Instagram, Blue Sky, and there are accounts on all the different social media places. I'm on Blue Sky more than anywhere else. If you just search for my name, Greg Pak, on Blue Sky. What's Blue Sky, you ask? It's the best one. I'm not even kidding. I will talk your ear off about it. But yeah, you can find links to it all there. But that's the passion project at the moment. For the next 3 weeks.
Oh yeah, okay. Let's not talk about that. For my last, I'm going to make a quick last plug for myself, right? Because I have a mini series coming out. It's Borderlands, kind of set in a Kowloon walled city situation. So if you're intrigued by that, that's coming out I think next month. And so that's happening. And at this point, hopefully you all hang out a little bit if you want to ask questions. But we're out of time. We'll be outside. Please stick around and visit all the wonderful artists and creators who are out there with their wares. Some people have some very cute stickers out there, too. There are a lot of free comics. Make sure you pick up the free comics that are by my table. I'm also giving out copies of Fighting to Belong, so if you'd like to pick up that as well. And yes, my son actually did say that he wanted to be a writer, and I had to say I had a moment. I'm not immune to that. Anyway, this has been wonderful. This is a joy for me in particular to be hanging out with all you guys and to all of you who've all turned out. So this is spectacular. I want to thank you and thank the speakers here. Thank you so much for coming.